Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. This is going to be a fun event. We're super excited. Completely sold out, which is such a good sign as to what people value in the community and what they want to learn more about. I'm the new executive director for Mountain Journal. My name is Jessie Weiss. We're so grateful to all of you Mountain Journal readers and supporters. And for those of you that don't know us, check us out at mountainjournal.org. Also, if you didn't see it in the lobby, if you want to learn more about us, there's a new book out by Mountain Journal's founder, Todd Wilkinson. It's called Ripple Effects, and it's all about how to save the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So definitely check that out if you want to learn more. I want to do a quick thank you to the Ellen. Thank you, Glenda and team. You guys are amazing. You had us up on your screen for quite a while over this week, and we really appreciate it. Also, thanks to Poindexters. Poindexters is an incredible group that does amazing audiovisual, and they are streaming this live on Facebook. So we have people tuning in from all over the country, which is really fun. And thank you to Leanne Ramey. Leanne is the one that's been selling the books out front and taking donations for Mountain Journal. Leanne has a beautiful space at the Emerson, so check her out when you can. And without a lot of ado, I will introduce our moderator for this evening, my colleague, Todd Wilkinson. Todd founded Mountain Journal 5 years ago. He's the preeminent voice on all things Yellowstone. So Todd's lived in this region for 37 years and been reporting on the critical issues of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem that entire time. He has been a National Geographic correspondent. He's written for The Guardian and dozens of other publications. So we're lucky to have him here tonight moderating what is sure to be an interesting panel. He's also authored several books, one of which, as I mentioned, is in the lobby tonight. So without further ado, Todd Wilkinson.
Good job, good job. Thank you all for coming tonight. I want to start with just a thought. Think about how lucky we are to be here. We're here with wolves back in Yellowstone National Park. We're here with wolves in our backyard. We're here where wolves contribute $82 million to the economy. We're here with people who were there and expressed courage throughout this time. And we're here in a part of the world where we still have all of our wildlife, and we brought wolves back. We consciously and deliberately brought wolves back after we had annihilated them. And we put an ecosystem back together. Greater Yellowstone, I just want to make a pitch, the only ecosystem in the lower 48 with all of the major mammals that were here in 1491 moving across the landscape. That doesn't exist anywhere else, not even in Glacier and the Northern Continental Divide. And so I also want to send a message to those who are tuning in and live streaming and who may be watching this later. But all of us are stakeholders in Yellowstone. It is a national treasure every bit as much as the U.S. Capitol or anything else. It belongs to us as citizens, as part of our birthright, similarly with public wildlife. So before we get in deeper into tonight's events, our goal at Mountain Journal is we want to save the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We need you. We all need to work together on that. We all know, if you're in Bozeman, Montana tonight, that we're in the midst of profound change. We all feel frustrated and angry. We don't know what to do. One of the great things about wildlife movements and habitat is it gives us a game plan for thinking not only about what we need to protect, but where we should build. And so tonight, we're really coming full circle. History matters, facts matter, remembering how we got here matters. In 1987, I was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The first U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service report on wolves came out. And the response from politicians in the region was, wolves, no how, no way. And it was a little bit more colorful than that in the language. But at that point in 1987, no one imagined or could imagine that we would have wolves back. And if we had left it up to Canadian wolves trying to find their way down here and repopulate the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, the likelihood of that happening was pretty remote. So if we had listened to the naysayers and accepted the annihilation of wolves, similar with wildlife conservation, if we had accepted the annihilation of lots of species in greater Yellowstone, and every species that I mentioned was nearly annihilated and it was brought back. So we live in the cradle of conservation. So tonight, this is a testament of not following this path. This was the view on that January day in 1995 when the first wolves were brought back. And tonight, we're going to have some people who were there as part of the restoration. Two of those people, Doug Smith, who's kneeling here, and Mike Phillips, were there and helped usher forth this new era in Yellowstone. And Mike passed off the baton to Doug Smith. Here's Mike and Doug together over an elk carcass, and to their right is a gentleman by the name of L. David Meach, foremost wolf biologist. And these two guys studied under Meach. They spent time in the upper Midwest. Meach is still alive today, and I remember being in Yellowstone with Dave Meach, and we were looking out over the Blacktail Plateau, and he was describing what it would be like to have wolves, and indeed, 5 years later, it happened. So, two people I want to introduce, first of all. One is this gentleman on the left. His name is John Potter. And that winter of 1995, he came in along with his friend, Scott Frazier, and they offered a prayer to wolves and bison in the Lamar Valley. And so here we are later. John also is a fine artist, nominated for a Pulitzer Prize earlier as a cartoonist for the Billings Gazette. He's a cartoonist for Mountain Journal now. You can tell me if And so again, here we are. We've come full circle. Last year, celebrated Yellowstone's 150th anniversary, and a lot of thought was given to the lands that formed Yellowstone prior to Yellowstone, going back millennia, and thinking about Yellowstone as a homeland and crossroads. And so what I'd like to do is have John step out before I introduce our next guest. John, could you come out? Ladies and gentlemen, John Potter.
Thank you very much for that. Can you guys hear me okay? Yep. Okay, then. I had no intention really of being up on stage tonight. I only came because I was told there would be fry bread. Promises, right? It's good to see everybody here. Thank you all for coming. What I want to do first, before we go too much further, is I want to acknowledge my friend and my little brother, Todd, here, for all the hard work that he does, and him and his crew, and everybody at MoJo, and all of you people here especially, but everything that Todd does in order to ensure that we have a Yellowstone ecosystem for our children and grandchildren and the 7th generation to come. So what I'd like to do is offer him a little tobacco, which is traditional among our people. You know, he's been around Indians long enough. He should know that this is going to happen. He should also know that you never hand a microphone to an Indian man. You may not get it back. going to give him this bird, a wingashk, which is given to us by Sky Woman back when she created the earth. She gave us these 4 medicinal plants, one of which was sweetgrass, and this is how we communicate with the spirit world, one way. The other way is by reading Mountain Journal. So before I turn things back over to Todd, I want to say Chi Miigwech, Chi Miigwech Mino Bimadasuin, Chi Miigwech Ogima, Chi Miigwech Bindagin Oma. Thank you all for being here tonight. It really fills my heart to see this place packed. Really appreciate that. And if you could, I'm going to give you a little Ojibwe lesson, and you just repeat after me, okay? Bimasikisha condition cause Wabijeji ni do dem Oswagani. Let's just settle for Miigwech, okay? That's thank you. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Have a great night and enjoy this evening. And we want to honor these people who have embraced the Native idea of holding wolves, not only just in relationship, but in kinship. And these people have lived their entire lives and their work lives ensuring that we try to see wolves not just as wolves, but as good relatives, because none of us would be here without wolves. Chi Miigwech. Oh.
So, of course, it's all of us doing this. Everybody in this room is needed, and every one of our friends. Speaking of friends, I just want to quickly mention, we have Hank Perry, MoJo's board chair, who flew in for this event. Hank, are you out there? Sandra Lambert, who lives in Paradise Valley, is on our board. Shane Doyle, whom you'll meet. Could hear a round of applause for the two of them. Sarah Diopsimer is the one who holds everything together and makes sure that we don't veer off course. Jesse Weiss is our new dynamic executive director and a tour de force. It's here for her. And Mr. Joseph T. O'Connor is our new managing editor, and you will see him shortly bring some chairs out to seat our guests, but he does a hell of a lot more than that. So let's hear it for Joe O'Connor. So the person I want to bring out now is Mike Phillips. He's a good friend. Mike led red wolf recovery in the Southeast, and then he was tapped to oversee Yellowstone wolf reintroduction as a biologist on the ground. Came out, that happened, first group of wolves in 1995. Doug Smith was working alongside of him then. From there, Mike went on and he founded the Turner Endangered Species Fund, along with Ted Turner, and has restored a lot of imperiled species on Turner lands and used them essentially as a refugia. Mike also has won the Aldo Leopold Award from the Wildlife Society. And most recently, you know, we often hear the refrain that if you don't like things, run for office and change things. So Mike ran for office as this wolf biologist in Montana and got elected to the House a couple of times, and then served in the Senate. And Mike himself is a tour de force. And Mike, could you come out here? He's going to join me in the conversation tonight.
This is really my treat to stand here and celebrate Commissioner Byorth and Dr. Smith, two important Montanans. And it's easy. I have many friends and family members in the audience. It's quite easy to stand among family and friends and celebrate important work. Todd, you wanted me to do something. Am I supposed to do it now?
Yes.
He wanted me to tell you a condor joke. You guys want to hear a condor joke? Tech with gray wolves, we'll talk about condors. It's a short joke. It's my only endangered species joke. There are these two condors flying about, California condors, and they notice this clown laying on the side of the road dead. And so as condors do, they fly down and they begin feeding on this clown carcass. And after a moment or two, one condor says to the other, "Does this taste funny to you?" Yeah, I know, right? That's a pretty good joke. Pretty good joke. So, Todd, so I think I know what he wants me to do.
If you don't control Mike, he goes off track.
Yeah.
So Mike out at the Flying D and elsewhere has led people in a wolf howling lesson. So Mike, that's your responsibility right now, and you know what else to do.
Yeah. So a comment on wolf howling. For a long, long time, I was under the impression it was illegal to howl inside. A few years ago, I had the good fortune to be at a big international conference, speaking mostly to a room full of billionaires from Asia, trying to inspire them to work on behalf of the natural world. As I finished my talk, the moderator convinced me to howl. So I howled and everybody clapped. It felt a bit stilted to me, but not long after that, an hour later, the wolf howling prompted Sylvia Earle, a great scientist. Sylvia led the room in a melody of whale songs. An hour later, Jane Goodall led the room in a symphony of chimp calls. And it struck me that sometimes it is appropriate to howl in something other than a wildland setting. Hold that thought. Y'all remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, what did Bozeman do to celebrate first responders? My wife is a first responder. We went outside and we howled. It was done all around the country, not just Bozeman, but it is a wonderful way to bring a community together in common language. So we're going to howl to start the evening. Our guests won't come out unless we howl. I will start, and I always howl the same way. It's how I was taught so many years ago. You'll hear me present a flat howl, a breaking howl, a flat howl. And if we were doing this for real, surveying big country looking for wolves based on their response, we do that, wait a minute, do that, wait a minute, do that, and move on. We're not going to go through the whole survey routine, but you'll hear me howl. You guys chime in. I will say there is no wrong way to howl except to not howl. Okay? So we're going to do this together. I'll start, but y'all have to chime in, yeah? Okay, here we go. Flat, breaking flat.
He's a critic.
Now you wait 1 minute, you wait 1 minute. Y'all weren't loud enough. So we're going to, one more time. Yeah, flat, breaking flat. There's no wrong way to howl except to not howl. So here we go.
Thank you, Smith. Thanks, Todd.
Nicely done.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Before we begin, there are two more people that I want to introduce, and they're going to kick this off right. Again, bringing everything full circle. The first person is Shane Doyle, who's a member of the MoJo board and has been crucially involved with Yellowstone, the land's re-embracing Indigenous America there. And related to that is Conrad Fisher, who's Northern Cheyenne. He's worked in culture and language and music and all manner of things, and has been a consultant to Yellowstone, again, during the 150th and going forward. Conrad is a man I greatly admire, and so is Shane Doyle. They're going to come out here, stage left, And they're going to regale us with 2 honoring songs. And Shane and Conrad, it's great to have you here. Let's hear it for them.
Na ho ne ta zum hoa this no manet this dinne da nimme nit the hotne the kistos das da nit da hoa the am the mats das it za won da nit to das hoa ge nimme yo won ge nimme yo wan that's my introduction, so you'll have to get an interpreter to. Did you want to say something, or do you want me to go into? Good evening. So special to be part of this event tonight, sort of a celebration and reintroduction of what we term hutne, wolf. And everything is related, whether we know it, whether we like it or not. We only live in one world, and that's Mother Earth. The hutne plays a huge role in our lives, whether you know it or not. They're part of a larger ecosystem in the world. Unfortunately, they've been minimized into settings such as national parks. They're not only important in our environment, but also to those culture groups that hold dear to them. And certainly for the Northern Cheyenne, the hutne is a huge part of our cosmology and our philosophy. Every culture group has certain metaphors, if you will, about animals. And certainly one that I think we can all agree is, in Native American terms, is the trickster, the coyote. Just a raise of hands, how many know what a trickster is or heard stories about it? So the coyote is kind of that. How many of you seen the cartoon Roadrunner and the coyote? Yeah, you get the picture. So he's kind of that type of a persona, whereas the wolf is more of a helper. And I'll tell you a real short story about a coyote story that was told to me by my dad. He's gone. Every culture group has their trickster stories. He said that one day, he was talking in Cheyenne, but I'll say it in English. It might not be as funny, but it's funny in Cheyenne. He said one day, coyote, and we don't look at coyote as one coyote. Coyote is everywhere. Coyote is, you killed 100,000 of them. Coyote is immemorialized. They're always going to be around. We've tried everything to exterminate him, but he pops up here and there. But he said coyote was walking, looking for food. He was starving, and so he was going around just like they do, sniffing and looking for something to eat. And he looked up on a tree, and he seen a raven. And a raven, of course, is a meat eater. And the raven had gotten some meat from a dead animal someplace. So he was up there, and he seen the raven, and he said to to the raven. He said, "Brother Raven," he said, "I've been looking all over for you. I've always heard about you. I've heard many stories about what a good singer you are. And I finally found you. I'm so glad to finally see you." And said, "Can you do me a favor? I come this way, I come this far from a long ways." He said, "Can you sing for me?" And so he was really buttering up the raven. And so the raven finally agreed. He still had that piece of meat in his mouth. So he started to clear his voice. He started to clear it, and so he really started singing. And as he opened his mouth, the piece of meat fell out. And the coyote got a hold of the meat. And as the raven was singing, he went on his way, went along and didn't even bother to but that's, of course, a coyote story. And but the wolf has a very different meaning to the Cheyenne people and to other culture groups. And I think today, as I heard some of the speakers, that we're trying really hard to preserve the lives of many different animals, not just the wolf. But tonight we're focused on wolves. And we have stories about them being helpers. There's a book that was written called Wolves of Heaven. And it's about the ceremonial purpose, the cultural purpose of wolves for the Cheyenne people. Very special book. And tonight we're going to sing a couple of wolf songs. Wolves, we call our scouts. I think many groups call their scouts, those Indian scouts that go out, wolves for a reason. But they're also part of our cultural institutions or cultural spheres. They're imbued in almost everything we do. However, today they're more symbolic because of the limitation where they are. And by the way, those were good howls. Some of you may have been a little on, but I was actually impressed. We were impressed back there. So yeah, you guys shook the house. So thank you very much. There's social songs oftentimes, but we have a lot of songs, wolf songs, and that's because of that persona of the wolf, being helpers, being spiritual leaders. They're omnipresent with us. And I wanted to share that because I think it's important. We all feel that energy. If you come across a wolf one-on-one out in the wild, I think you'd feel that energy, and your hair would stand on your back. You may not have hair, but you might have goosebumps or something. But I wanted to say those things because it's really important when you sing a song. You're doing a lot of things at once. You're memorializing, you're communicating, all these things. But more importantly, it's that connection we have to our past today. We may not physically see, I've never seen a wolf, a live wolf out in the wild, but certainly the stories that have been passed on to me, I feel like I can relate to those. I feel like I know the persona of those wolves because the things we learn from them, not only the songs, but the kinship system that they have are similar to many of the things in our own families, the structure they have. and that spirit that they have. So I wanted to say those things because it's important for, as an educator, to come out with some of these things. And again, because of a lot of things happening, we've sort of disengaged ourselves diverged from the meaning of what this animal symbolizes. So thank you very much for having me share the little bit of the history. Did you want to say anything?
No, just launch into it.
Okay. And Shane,
Oh, I got
you
one
want to
thing.
introduce
Yeah,
yourself?
sure, you bet. I'll say a word or two. Good to see everybody. Thank you, Todd. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Very proud to be a member of the Mountain Journal Board of Directors and to honor these great people here who I admire very much, Pat and Doug. Just how I can't even, begin to describe how much you've given to this community, to the world, and it's a great honor to be able to provide these songs to everyone here tonight. I'm so thankful for Conrad coming over from Billings and teaching me these songs, sharing these with me and with the world to make the world a better place. And, the world's a better place with wolves in it. And, I kind of grew up, I grew up without a dad. I never knew my dad. And, as an adult, I finally learned who he was just a few years ago. And, he's a Ho-Chunk. He's a member of the Ho-Chunk tribe, and I discovered I'm a member of the Wolf Clan. I don't think I told you that. Kind of cool, I'm still figuring it all out, but anyway, it's a great honor. We've got some good tunes here.
We're going to sing a song that has Cheyenne words in it. And the words to the song says, and as you know, for those of you, how many of you are bilingual, by the way? Well, I don't. Yeah. Well, how many of you are monolingual then? At any rate, sometimes you can't translate the words directly. But I hope that you get what these words say. As I mentioned to Todd, that the words say, this sacred land, this huge land, I know it. From one end to the other. And it's not from a native perspective. This song has been with us for, we don't know, 100, 500 years now. It's a song that has been carried from one generation to another. But it's coming from the perspective of a wolf. Wolves are found everywhere. So whoever brought this to us from a wolf's perspective, I think really exemplifies the courage and the persistence and the continuity of that animal, that they're all over the place. They know one end to the other. So we sing that because we want to pay homage to that spirit, to that animal. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to be taught that song. So I wanted to share this because we need to showcase some of our cultural practices. Certainly, Native Americans are still alive and diverse. They have diverse cultural practices. And you're only seeing a slice of how we feel how important a wolf is to those tribes.
Hey,
Thank you. Thank you very much. These songs are also social songs, and we, as I mentioned, there's a lot of songs that have different styles. As I mentioned, they can be social songs, they can be scouting songs, they can be ceremonial songs, but as you can see, these wolf songs are a very important part of who we are as Cheyenne people, the connection we have directly to the wolf. So the next one we're going to sing, the last one, is a social song. And so hope you enjoy it. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad, and thank you, Shane, from the eastern side of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So we want to get at the real wolf tonight, not the fabricated wolf, not the wolf that flies across the landscape on angel's wings, nor one that is the incarnation of the devil. And I want to pose a question. Let's get at this. So, Doug, you've been in Yellowstone for more than a quarter century, and during that time, 75 million visits to Yellowstone amid a wolf population of roughly 100. You've also been in Minnesota, as Mike has, where there's the largest wolf population and several million people. How many people have died, been attacked? How many kids in Gardner have been eaten up while waiting for their school bus? In that time, maybe you could fill us all in on how many wolf attacks have occurred in Yellowstone.
So softball questions right out of the gate. None in that entire region, Lake States, northern Rocky Mountains of the U.S. There's been no fatalities and no injuries in Yellowstone, none that I'm aware of in the tri-state area. We have had wolves become fearless of people, habituated. We've had management action against them. We've killed 2 in Yellowstone, but nobody has been hurt in that entire region that you've spoken of, and for sure, no fatalities.
Okay, thank you for that. Pat Byorth. Pat Byorth recently served on the Montana Fish and Wildlife Commission appointed by Governor Bullock. Early in his career, he was a fish biologist for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Then, in his early 40s, he decided to make a pivot and do a career change. He went to law school, got his law degree, came back. He now oversees Trout Unlimited State Aquatics Program. He is an incredible bright thinker in mind when it comes to water and water ecosystems. So Pat Byorth, given your wildlife experience, how many wildlife populations? The great Bob Fanning, whom you may remember, told me and told others that wolves were the greatest ecological disaster ever foisted upon the American West and Yellowstone. So for the record, as a state wildlife commissioner, how many wildlife populations have been decimated, eliminated from the earth due to wolves?
About the same number as humans have been attacked, none as we know of.
And do you want to maybe riff on some wildlife numbers for?
Well, currently, or at least the last numbers I could dredge up easily in preparation, we have right around 94,000 elk in the state right now. It could be up to 120,000 or down as low as 88 maybe. But elk populations haven't dwindled. Elk populations, like most wildlife populations, are set by habitat. And so we've had a couple districts where wolves have had a profound impact in terms of changing distribution and changing numbers. But even those districts alongside Glacier or Yellowstone Park, those elk populations are at what was considered an objective that was established back in 2005.
Great. Thank you. And I should note that all 3 of these gentlemen on stage are hunters. Mike Phillips. Well,
I have a hard time hitting things. The birds are quick.
So Mike Phillips has worked for Ted Turner. He has a soft spot in his heart for ranchers and farmers. He grew up in farm country himself in the Midwest. Mike, not showing any disrespect to agrarians out there, and I want you to jump in, Doug, after this about the, wolves do represent our serious issue for some folk. But Mike, how many ranchers or farmers that you know of have been driven out of business by wolves? We've had members of Congress say that wolves are one of the greatest and most imminent threats to agriculture in the West. So what's your view on that?
Well, it's patently untrue, and of course, wolves don't eat plants, so the farmers have nothing to worry about. They are obligate carnivores. And insofar as ranching is concerned, there are many things that drive the industry. Bad weather, bad luck, bad marriages, bad kids, bad finances. Gray wolves don't drive the industry. Gray wolves can cause a problem on occasion for individual producers. And that is something to take seriously. Fortunately, Todd, there are good tools at the ready to prevent conflicts from ever arising, and good tools at the ready for resolving conflicts when they do arise. Coexisting with gray wolves. If you take nothing from this evening except this one fact, coexisting with gray wolves is a straightforward affair that requires only a modicum of accommodation. The big game industry, the ranching industry are not impacted by gray wolves. They just aren't. There are no data to support the claims. It's all hype.
Thank you. Doug, you said something backstage where you wanted, you didn't want to sugarcoat anything. You're a wolf advocate, a wolf conservationist, but just riff a little bit off of what Mike just said.
Well, I mean, there's nothing to take issue with about what Mike just said. It's true, but I think what happens is when you are that rancher, when you are that hunter, they feel that wolves have been foisted on them. They are another mouth to feed. They are another predator. They do things to wildlife behavior. They do kill them. And so in their minds, that's a significant effect. And so I think, the data is, Mike just stated the data, but data doesn't win our battles. It's perceptions, it's feelings, and when those folks out there are feeling like they're not being listened to, they don't have a part of the debate, then they dig in, they harden. And so, I'm a wolf advocate, I'm a wolf idealist, but I've changed my stance a little bit to say, what can we get that's reasonable? We can't get everything, and so where is the ground where we can work things out? And I think that's what we need them to do too. Instead of this kind of trench warfare, throwing hand grenades and whatnot, we need to understand that not everybody's going to get what they want, and we need to come to the middle. And I think that's a lot of land use planning. Where are there good places for wolves? Where are there not good places for wolves? We want to manage in favor of those things. Certainly public land can be a stronghold. Certainly places where there's a lot of people in agriculture is not a stronghold. Looking at it like that and managing with both kind of groups in mind, I think by any standard is reasonable argument to make. And I think that's the way forward. And so, not wolves everywhere, not wolves all the time, but we can do this.
Thank you. We're going to jump to Pat and then to Mike.
Todd told me when I'm supposed to ask questions too, right? And I was supposed to signal him with my finger. And it was a question for both Pat and Doug, but go ahead, I'll ask it. Go ahead.
Well, no, I want you to jump in, but could you please also help our crowd understand what the Montana Fish and Wildlife Commission is, what it means to serve on it, and I know you wanted to jump in as a follow-up too, but help us all understand what.
Sure, I'll just start really briefly by saying I looked up some data, and this is for 2019. There were 75 livestock killed by wolves, and of that 75, about 25 were sheep, and largely on one operation. The other 50 were cattle, and in that year, 75 wolves were taken out of the population in response. So there are tools, and the tools are being employed. And now, if you're a stock grower, there's an economic impact. Obviously, you're losing livestock, and there is compensation for that. But it's much more than just the economic compensation, because livestock, ranchers, wool growers are deeply concerned about their livestock. They're not quite pets, but they're not just an economic force. So It's a very personal thing when your livestock that you take care of day in, day out is taken away from you by something as emotional as a wolf predation. It's significant. And that circles around to what is the responsibility of the commission. The commission is a creature of statute. It's a panel of commissioners, now 7 commissioners, whose job is not to do the bidding of the department, whether it's biological or political, or not just to do the bidding of politicians or the public. The job is to weigh the biology, focus on the biology. What's the best thing for wildlife? It's in statute. Our job isn't to make judgments on how many wolves are enough. It's about, of the wolves, how many wolves is it biologically sound to harvest? And that goes for all wildlife species, game species and otherwise. And we also do land acquisitions and habitat acquisitions. So the important thing I think that the commission role is to weigh the biology, focus on the biology and weigh it against the politicians, the statutes that tell us what our authority is, and then to listen closely to the public. Whether you love wolves, you hate wolves, or you just love wildlife and you want us to manage them properly. That's the role of the commission.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Yeah, so Doug, thank you, Commissioner Byorth. Doug just made an important point that I strongly believe in. Politics is the art of compromise. And Doug, you said, what can we get? So a question to Commissioner Byorth on Dr. Smith that should resonate. The park and the state recently came to an agreement. 6 wolves on the northern boundary of the park could be killed. Commissioner Byorth, Doug, why 6 doesn't make sense?
Well, when we were going into the conversation, I was told by a person high in the department that there would be no quota. And then the public sounded loud and clear that it was not sound management to have unbridled harvest at the park boundary. The department came up with a recommendation that we should set the quotas at 10 wolves. My read of the data and my read of the politics and the people's voice was that 4 was proper. And then, fortunately, the experts spoke up, and that was Doug.
Okay, well, thank you for that. You know, it's tough, and the tough thing about it is, and I've said this before, so I'll go quickly, you know, the National Park Service mission is preservation. That means no use. The mission of the state wildlife agencies pretty much everywhere is conservation. That means wise use, and it's an abrupt line. And how do you compromise when you have that? And the animals kind of don't know it either. And, you know, the elk population transboundary, you know, roughly 90% of the elk are wintering outside the park. In the winter, they go in the summer. So they're really transboundary. But there's a population, you know, the segment of wolves that we're talking about, Hunt District 313 does not really have a large resident population of wolves. And so most of the wolves that were being killed there are from the park. And in fact, the wolves that were being killed there spent 96% of their time in the park. The other problem is those wolves are naive to human hunters. They're not wary of them as a wolf that lives with human hunters all the time. They grow accustomed to being hunted, and so they respond accordingly. These wolves aren't doing that because it's the best place in the world to view wolves. And so it's tough to compromise like that. You know, 96% of the time in the park, not wary of people. And then again, millions of people are coming to see these wolves, and they benefit through visitor enjoyment. And that's a big goal of the U.S. National Park Service, is preservation and visitor enjoyment. And we're achieving those goals. And it's not like they're 50% in and 50% out, where you know, it's a little bit more difficult to reach that compromise. Nonetheless, I've been told many times when the wolf's not standing in the park, it's not a park wolf. And so we had to work something out, and what we had was working for about 10 years, because we learned right out of the gate in, I think it was 2011, that the first hunting season there was, we lost some significant number of wolves, Cottonwood Creek Pack primarily, was we learned that these wolves are not wary. And so we've got to reach some kind of accommodation. We hit that, and that accommodation was reached through conversations and discussions, a lot of them off to the side. and that system was working. And so picking up where Pat left off, that broke down in 2022. We didn't have that compromise anymore. We lost some of the dialogue. And so what it came down to was what's reasonable, given everything I just said. And so working internally, actually, we wanted 4-2, but the commission started off with no quota, came back in with 10. We commented in writing, and what we thought was reasonable was 6. So that's what we asked for. That's what we stuck with. That's what we thought was something we could get. A very human enterprise of we want more, we don't think we can get it, what is reasonable? I had a lot of feedback. A lot of people were not happy with that it was too high. The reasoning was that's what we thought we could get. So now we have that, and actually the approach was thank you. You came down. That's something that's satisfying, and that in a nutshell. And Pat and I talked quite a bit off to the side, which was very helpful. And through those conversations, it opened doors between the Park Service, state employees, and the commission. And I will firmly stand by, it was those discussions that did it. The public feedback was overwhelming, but those discussions were productive, respectful, and of good nature. And I think that's what we need more of, actually.
So, Doug, yes. So, Commissioner Byorth and Dr. Smith just described a process that we can all applaud. It was brought forth because the public engaged. The commissioner said the public moved the issue forward to this process. Do y'all know in your state right now, gray wolves can be killed for recreational purposes 6 months out of the year. A target of about 459 animals can be killed. Possession up to 10. That's a pretty heavy hand of recreational killing. You've already heard a commissioner say, you guys matter. If those numbers offend, there's always the opportunity to engage.
Mike, I'm just going to add to this. That's recreational killing on top of management actions and control. So it can be a lot more than that. Doug, I want all three of you to weigh in here. Let's go back a year to 2021, 2022, because that's really what sets the context for the wolf quota this year. The commission acts, it sets a number. Tell us what happened in Yellowstone during that winter with the Phantom Lake Pack. You know, tell us what happened, and what was that like for you to witness, given that unexploited wolf packs in the lower 48 are incredibly rare. There's not a lot of terrain that could accommodate something like that. So what was it like for you, Pat? What was it like for you, Mike, as someone who's an expert yourself and watching? What was that like? So walk us through what happened. Very controversial year.
Well, I'll start off by saying the tough thing about wolves is they almost don't exist anywhere in the world without human exploitation. Yes, you can find some parks. Yes, you can find some remote regions of Canada and maybe Russia where people aren't really impacting their social and their population dynamics. But by and large, and let's just restrict it to North America, almost all wolf populations have to deal with some form of human-caused mortality. That's just their story. Many famous wolf people have said to have wolves, you have to kill them. That's what kind of societal issue they are. So back to Todd's question. Here we had a rare opportunity. We have Yellowstone Park. It was not the complete GYE population, but it's a segment of that larger population that was largely unexploited. So this was a rare opportunity to document how population and social dynamics work without the impact of human killing. So we kind of had that going. In general, we were losing, before last winter, 2 to 4 wolves per winter, which is still human-caused mortality, but low enough that we didn't think it was impacting the population. And then, just kind of luckily, we were there studying them, okay? And so those other remote populations that I was referring to that are unimpacted by humans, usually there's no one sitting there studying them. And so that was a rare thing we had going for 26, 27 years that got taken away last year. It was 18% of the population that killed last year. That's pretty much a harvest rate. So you can't say they're unexploited. So that kind of set some of our research back. And what we learned from that, wolves are resilient to human killing. You know, there's a lot of numbers thrown around, but you can pretty much sustainably harvest 1/3 of the population. But what we're learning from these studies of unexploited populations, socially that number's a lot lower. And we have a paper coming out any day on this, that socially they're not as resilient and durable and as adaptable as they are reproductively. And that's something that you get the wrong wolf and it changes everything. Certainly you can kill them, they adapt, they reorganize their reproductive behavior. They might even produce more offspring because you're breaking up that social fabric. So the Phantom Lake Pack, which is what your question was specifically addressing, was a boundary pack. They sat there right on the boundary. They were living up the Black Canyon, the Yellowstone River Corridor, Deckard Flats. And Deckard Flats, the other problem with the hunting in the park is it's constrained by the landscape. It's a kind of a terrain restricted. And so the hunters can just watch 2 spots, Deckard Flats and Beatty Gulch. And so you can put spotting scopes, and there's people there every day. They're there now. They see the wolves come out, they ride out, and they go after them. Because the elk, the bison, the deer, the wolves, they funnel out on these travel routes, so you know where they're going to be. So the Phantom Lake Pack pretty much, for all we knew, got wiped out last year. So that mixed the deck completely differently on the landscape. Wolves are territorial, ferociously territorial. So they functioned as a plug, keeping other packs that were behind them, I'm generalizing to make a point, from coming out of the park. You take them out, they're not a territory holder anymore. Other Junction Butte pack came out of the park. We lost, I think it was 5 wolves from that pack. We lost wolves out of the 8 Mile pack. We lost wolves out of Rescue Creek pack. And so when one whole pack goes, the whole territorial structure goes, and then you start picking off individuals from other packs. Most notably, the 8 Mile pack lose the lead female. Well, they started showing up in places they had never been before. Why is that? We don't know, but it's probably because the old lady got taken out, you know, and she's a subtle leader of that pack. And so all of a sudden, you could say, well, not that many wolves were killed. The population bounced back reproductively, but everything was different. On the landscape with the pack structure, and within the packs with the social structure. And that's what's been understudied. That's the next frontier of wolf research. And that's what we had going. And that's what's having to be reset. And so a lot of people might say, that's okay. That's okay. But what is the purpose of national parks? Why are they in place? What are we supposed to do? So the biggest argument that we had as the National Park Service is, that's not a compromise. That's not reasonable. That's not the middle. Yeah. And when you can bring the data to the table like that, we thought we had, and then again, it's the benefit of the people. Millions versus, Pat would know better, a handful benefited from taking those animals. And so I don't know if that's exactly what you were pushing at, Todd, but that's why we were so concerned.
One more thing before we move on, because I want to get Pat and Mike to answer. You know, you guys aren't robots working for the National Park Service. You're there because you have a passion for nature. Tell us, I know that Cam Shawley was very supportive of you and shared your grief of what was going on. What was it like being in Yellowstone with your colleagues, watching these animals that you were studying, that had been an important part of your research, getting annihilated?
I mean, that is the tough part of doing any kind of wildlife research, especially research that's based on, there's a lot of different ways to study wildlife populations. A lot of studies are done at the population level. The Yellowstone Wolf Project built up from individuals to the pack level to the population level. So it's all based on getting to know individuals. So it's very hard. It's very hard. You do get to know them. I did know them better in the earlier days when Mike was there than, later on. But the thing about Cam Shawley, you said, that connects with what I said earlier. I served under 6 superintendents. He's the most personable superintendent that I served under, which means, he's texting you at 10 at night. He's calling you on Sunday morning, let's talk about this wolf thing. And, that's what it takes. That's what it takes. My wife, Christine's here. She knows that only all too well. But that's what it takes. You have to be on all the time. And Cam is. He is.
Okay, thanks. So during that winter, the state was really portrayed as kind of a villain in all of this. What was it like? Where does science come in on this? What was your frustration?
Well, where I started, I came onto the commission in 2019 in April. And so at that time, there was a quota along the park boundary in 2 hunting districts of 4. And the commission, as I was on it, reduced that quota down to 1. We couldn't reduce it to 0 because there's a state law that says we cannot establish buffer zones along the park boundary. And that's a legislature. And so the legislature then comes in 2021 with these crazy bills that said, you'll kill them at night, you'll kill them from planes, you'll kill them, all kinds of crazy things, said, and you'll reduce the population down to nothing. And so we went from a very conservative management on the park boundary for a lot of reasons, political and biological reasons, to nothing. And we end up harvesting, up to 25% roughly of the greater park population. That's just not good management. And why was it bad management? Well, it's because it was the legislature trying to manage wolves. And the new commission that came on with the new governor, they're greenhorns anyway. I was the only carryover. And they saw this legislation come out that had a lot of maize and had a few shells, but we actually had discretion. The commission had discretion to do things differently. But we went whole hog with the legislature's perceived mandates, and the wolves got hit hard. And it was a horrible decision from the commission. It gave me fits. Just like a lot of people, I really do care about wildlife and I care about wolves. So in this next round, largely because the biology was so bad. I mean, it's just bad biology. We don't do this with other species. We don't eradicate 25% of protected populations, whether they're elk or deer or what have you. We manage carefully for long-time sustainable populations. So this was a horrible decision. It was somewhat rectified after the public raised holy hell and after the biologists finally had a voice again, and we reduced it back to what I consider a fairly good decision. I would have preferred a more conservative, to go back to a more conservative quota along the park, but that felt like a Pyrrhic victory, right after this really bad decision manifested itself in biological ways that Doug described so aptly, but also political ways. It fired up people. And if there's a silver lining to all that, this story I've told, it really spoke to a couple things. First, people are mad. Montanans are mad. Republicans are mad. The livestock industry is mad because this was not solid management. And the second part is we had these egregious regulations. Well, in my view, night hunting is not fair chase. I don't care who you are. Infrared goggles that's not fair chase. But what happened was It set up hunters and trappers to, slaughter wolves wherever they wanted, but they didn't. They didn't show up. Mike has some data that he could share with us that show that it's really a handful, maybe 15 or 20 people harvested more than one wolf. Because hunters largely are fair chase oriented. They don't hate wolves. They love wildlife. They want to conserve wildlife. And this is not the kind of behavior that many hunters support. So it was another statement back to the legislature saying, go ahead with your crazy crap, but we're going to take responsibility as conservationists. We're going to take responsibility as Montanans to perpetuate our wildlife.
Hey, Mike, would you jump in as...
So before I respond to my thoughts about the 21-22 massacre, y'all should study your laws. It's your state. The law does not insist on people like Pat Byorth on the commission. It should. Right? It should. It doesn't. It largely favors regional representation. Commissioner Byorth is the kind of person that we need helping to oversee our great resources. My thoughts on the 21-22 massacre, I'm of the mind that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. I'm of the mind that if needless killing is not wrong, nothing is wrong. I was of the mind that the massacre on the park's northern border was wrong. It had been anticipated. I brought a bill in my last session in the state legislature, in the Senate Bill 185, that would have prohibited killing gray wolves within about a mile of the park. Bill didn't make it out of committee. People argued it was all about management. I said, it's not about management, it's about symbolism. Montana is better than killing naive animals for no good reason. There are no livestock in that country that need to be concerned with. There's no pressure on an ungulate population that's hunted for recreational purposes where predation by gray wolves is oppressive. It was needless killing. So, Todd, the massacre, where'd you go? Oh. The massacre pissed me off. It was wholly unnecessary. Okay. If needless killing is not wrong, nothing is wrong.
One of the things we want to do is open it up to your questions tonight. And before we do that, I just have two more. This is important. 4 white guys sitting up on a stage. It sounds like the opening to a joke, but it's not. Courage does not come from race or gender, but stepping up and doing the right thing. And that's what we have with all 3 of these conservationists tonight. When we were talking last week, Doug, you mentioned about some of the really cool things happening in Yellowstone. So I would like to get at this point. So for someone who isn't a white male out there here or watching tonight, what are some of the hopeful things to broaden the conservation movement and broaden the representation of America into science? So that's a question for all 3 of you.
Kind of a tough question, Todd. What first attracted me to wolves was they were, well, there's a couple different things, but one of them was they were downtrodden. They were underdogs, so to speak. And I think that's attracted a broad swath of people to work with wolves in Yellowstone. If there's any contribution I feel I've made is I grew up on my father owned a camp, and it was all about kids and the outdoors. And I kind of poached that idea from him and had a really vibrant volunteer technician grad student program that involved a lot of different people. And I think because wolves attract, people who might be downtrodden themselves or whatever it is, it was a broad swath of people. And in fact, and all diverse parts of our world and culture, not always from the United States. And I actually struggled to keep it 50-50 guys, gals. Way more gals applied for volunteer jobs than dudes. We had really good racial representation for this region, I think. And so bringing that community up, I think it was a way of, wolves coming back, as I've heard many of the conversations before we started tonight, and tonight has done so much for the ecology of the area. A way of giving back to people is this attraction to the young people that have been inspired and fired up to come do this. And so that really fired my jets for a long time. When I was running out of gas, I was worn down, I was tired of the bureaucracy. The young people were still just super excited, and they were all kinds, sometimes weird, and I thought that was great too,
Let's hear it for young people.
Yeah.
When I started my career as a fisheries conservationist, fish and wildlife conservationist, I go to the Fisheries Society meeting every February, and initially it was all white dudes and 3 women, and they were badass biologists. The ratio was, swayed probably 80-30, no, not even that much, probably 97-30, or 3. Probably my math is suffering up here on the stage. It's the lights, I swear. But now, next month, I'll go to the Fisheries Society meeting in Montana in Butte, and the ratio is pretty close to 50-50. And I'm an ecologist, by training and by heart. And what that tells me is, A, we have hope because we have great people coming in. Why would we restrict our voices to 50% of the population or less? Or why would we restrict our, ecological diversity to 50%? No, we want to shoot for 100%. And I got to say, in this crazy time of Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, that we have a fantastic staff. The field staff is holding it together, and it's about, in my region, fish and wildlife biologists, it's about 50-50. And they're all badasses, and they're holding this together, and I'm proud of them. So diversity is good. It's been helpful.
Great. One thing I want to note, Mike has been involved again with Ted Turner's Lands, and they have a badass biologist by the name of Val Asher, who's in the audience tonight. Let's hear it for her.
Well, Todd stole my thunder. I was going to draw attention to Valpa right there. I have been blessed with some great teammates, including Doug. But that includes women. And I will say this. I was very good in the legislature at introducing bills that died in committee. So if you had an idea that you wanted killed, I was your man. But if I could have passed a bill, I would have passed a bill that said old white guys like myself can't serve an elected office for 100 years. We've had our bite at the apple, and I don't think we've done that well with it. Doug and I were part of an effort to draw attention to the power of women. Doug and I were part of an effort by Grizzly Creek Films. They'll show it to Bozeman soon. It's not my thunder to steal. But it does tell a fascinating story about a most important woman by the name of Molly Beatty. So we have done what we can to draw attention to the need for more diversity in the conservation workspace.
We're about to move to questions, but 2 issues that I really want to get at. One is quickly, chronic wasting disease, and what is the value of having a healthy predator guild? Wolves, bears, coyotes, and mountain lions. How important is that as a gauntlet?
Well, there's a benefit to short answers, and the shortest answer to that is they can't hurt, for sure. I mean, that is the age-old culling that predators are best known for, that a lot of people, I think, are wives' tales. But it's true, they are selective killers. They kill the sick, the weak, the young, the stupid. I mean, that's what predators do. And a brilliant woman who just finished her work in Yellowstone. She's now in charge of wolf research in Colorado. Ellen Brandel headed up a team writing a model on, what wolves and cougars would do to chronic wasting disease. What would be the impact of an intact predator community? It helps. It slows the spread. It minimizes the spread. I actually like to be an outlier. Sometimes you say things just to prove a point because they might seem fantastical, but I actually don't think CWD is going to make it into Yellowstone Park because you have the most intact predator guild of anywhere in the lower 48, maybe all of North America. And I think they're just going to, a sedentary vector is not going to spread like a mobile vector. And it's not just one predator, it's multiple predators. They're going to seek and destroy. They're going to take them out. I'm probably wrong, but it's a hypothesis to test. All of science is about hypothesis testing. I'm making a prediction. It ain't going to make it in because you've got wolves, cougars, bears, 2 species, coyotes. They're going to get them. If I'm wrong, it's going to subdue it, it's going to tamp it down, and it for sure is not going to hurt. And Pat and I got in a conversation on the phone the other day. Group sizes is a big way to spread diseases, and wolves are doing all things to group sizes. It does vary if it's an open or closed landscape. What I mean by closed is forested versus open. But that deals with brucellosis, that deals with CWD. They're not going to hurt. So that for sure can be said, and I'll stand by. I hope I'm around long enough to be proven wrong. I don't think it's going to make it in the park because a predator is going to take it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a different? Do you want to jump in?
Sure.
Okay.
I just remember Aldo Leopold said the art of intelligent tinkering is maintaining all the parts. And I'm a fish guy, so I'm going to talk about fish instead of wolves. But the last pandemic, before COVID got cool, was whirling disease. And it decimated trout populations in our rivers in southwestern Montana. Why did they bounce back? It's because we still maintain the resiliency in the system, a healthy ecosystem, including predators. A whole suite of predators eat fish too. And good water quality, connected streams. You build resiliency into the system so things like chronic wasting disease or whirling disease, as they encroach on the ecosystem can respond. The ecosystem can heal itself. And I think wolves, as Doug articulated, are a great addition to disease management on the landscape and putting resiliency in, not just in the park, but across Montana, back into our ecosystem. Our wildlife are better off when there's predators on the landscape.
Right.
And I want to make a point, and we're blessed to have David Quammen in the audience who knows this material a great deal better than I do. CWD is always fatal. Some very good scientists would have you believe it's just a matter of time before it's another spillover event, to borrow David's title of one of his books, that it goes from just affecting cervids, hoofed deer, hoofed mammals, to affecting humans. It's always fatal. The CWC says you ought not eat meat from a CWD-infected animal. The problem is you don't know if it's infected if you don't have it tested. Are you willing to take the chance? Always fatal.
Thanks.
Yeah, you like that, huh? I've got a joke about condors.
So my final question for these guys, again, is this. We can't live in la-la land with predators. They're very controversial. Mike Phillips, a couple years ago, MoJo had a story on the fact that in Wyoming and Montana, it's legal to run down coyotes with snowmobiles. And you were among the lawmakers. You were in Montana. There were some counterparts in Wyoming who introduced a bill to outlaw that practice. And if there were big enough snowmobiles, it would have been legal to do it with wolves. The bill died in Wyoming, culturally unacceptable. What happened in Montana? If you could speak to that. And then what I'd also like to do after that is just get Doug and Pat to answer the question, why is it so hard to move past our hatred of wolves? So, Mike.
Todd is right. In the 2019 session, I brought a trio of bills. One said no killing of gray wolves near the park. The other said no predator contests. You can't go out and kill 30 coyotes and come back to the local church and have a barbecue and celebrate the 30 dead coyotes. We ought not celebrate needless killing. So the bill Todd's referring to was the third bill. It said you can't torture coyotes to death in the state of Montana. Montanans are better than that. My bill said nothing about how many coyotes. It didn't prohibit hunting coyotes off a snowmobile. It simply said at the time the coyote is exhausted, it can't move anymore. She's laying there looking at you in the snowbank. She can't move any further. At that point, you have to kill that animal humanely. You can't run it over repeatedly with a snowmobile. That's all the bill said. The bill died in committee. As is my authority as a state senator, I can go to the full Senate and say, I move to remove that bill from the standing committee. They made a mistake. This is important enough. We should hear it as a committee of the whole. That's what it's called, a committee of the whole. The whole Senate can consider whether this bill should pass. On the day I made the motion, I had whipped votes on that motion. I wanted to remove that bill, so I lobbied my Republican colleagues. I drank their whiskey. I played poker. They were friends of mine. I'd served for many years. Help me with this procedural motion. Vote for this so we can talk about it. Stand up, make my motion. Mr. Chairman, I move we remove Senate Bill 187 from State Fish and Game and hear it on the Senate floor tomorrow. And at that point, I have the chance to offer some brief rationale for why someone would vote yes. I said to the committee of the whole, if we had a kid in our neighborhood, a young boy that was using his bicycle to run over the neighborhood cats, we'd be concerned for that boy's mental health. This is no different. Montana's better than that. We ought not torture coyotes to death. My procedural motion failed on a party line vote. 18 Democrats said yes. Let's hear the bill. 32 Republicans said no. I was shocked. As we finished our work that day, the majority leader for the Republicans was a friend of mine, a guy named Fred Thomas. I said, Fred, my Lord, you couldn't throw me that one vote. Vote against the bill, but let's at least hear it. And he said, Mike, you were really looking out for us with that bill, weren't you? I said, Fred, what kind of people do you represent that would want to make it lawful to run coyotes over with a snowmobile? At that point in time, and I'd served for 14 years, at that point in time, I could no longer pray with my Senate colleagues. That was a big deal for me. I'm not especially partisan. They're friends of mine, and for 14 years I would stand every day. We would begin a session with a prayer, and I would stand politely and share in the prayer. From that point forward, I could only stand in the anteroom and mind my own business until the prayer was over, and then I'd step back into the chamber and pledge allegiance to the flag. I was sorely disappointed and saddened that we couldn't get the legislature to rise above the notion of torturing coyotes. So sad that I could not cotton to their hypocrisy any longer. I certainly wasn't about to pray with them any longer. There is no God that I would worship that would celebrate torturing coyotes.
Well, Todd just looked at me, and I don't want to talk after that. That's pretty hard. You know, Mike's an orator, as you can tell, so that's hard to follow. So I'll just finish, I guess, this last question by saying two quick points. There's a friend of mine in the audience. I can't see him, and he's a lot hairier than the last time I saw him. But I'm gonna plagiarize something I heard him say one time, and this is a little bit off subject, but also related. We were both speaking at the same venue. I'm searching him out here. His name's Chris Servine. He's the former recovery coordinator for grizzly bears, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And he said the best conservation we can do is reach the heart of a hunter in the mountains and woods when they are by themselves. And once he said that, I went home and thought about that long and hard ever since. And so, how I carry myself impacts a hunter and what they think about wolves and what they will do alone in the woods, pull the trigger or not. And so that's why this constant idea of, Doug, you're an idealist, that does not work anymore. What can you get that is reasonable to reach that human's heart in the woods alone with a gun? And so that's what I'm thinking about a lot. I'll leave it at that for the other questions, but I think Pat's up next, yeah.
It's even harder to follow both of these. I think we have a cultural hatred of wolves, apparently, driving a lot of this. And I blame it on Little Red Riding Hood, our fairy tales have been, were unkind. And it set us up for this false dichotomy. We have good wildlife and we have bad wildlife. Wolves are bad, predators are bad, we need to pay a bounty, we need to eradicate them. And then deer are good, they're beautiful, Bambi, right? And that's manifests itself, in history. When I was a kid, growing up in Billings, Montana, my father and my brothers and I and friends and neighbors loved to hunt and fish together. But wildlife populations weren't very strong back then. In fact, elk, if you really wanted to hunt elk, except for the park boundary, the old Gardner firing line days, you might go up to the front because there's elk that still would come out of the Bob, or people could hunt in the Bob Marshall. And there was populations, huntable populations here and there. But it wasn't, it was, I think, the 20s where we were moving elk around trying to reestablish elk, right? They weren't very abundant at all. And white-tailed deer actually were very scarce in western Montana, and mule deer were waxing and waning without predators, right? Lions, by the 1950s, and I'll get the numbers wrong, so don't quote me on this, but about 20% of lion habitat was occupied. And when we switched it to a game animal, it rapidly became it occupied 100% of its habitat. The wildlife populations, or the game populations, rose right along with grizzly bears, wolves. Black bears were rare on the face of the bear tooth, such that the harvest was highly restricted. Now black bears are in my backyard and probably yours. Might even see one downtown tonight, So we've orchestrated this amazing restoration of wildlife, and we've done it with a few pillars. One is scientific-based wildlife management. And part and parcel of that science-based wildlife management is the fair chase, the hunter's ethic, what Doug spoke of. We don't go out to slaughter wildlife. We go out to be intimate, to relate to wildlife, to be scared when a wolf howls at night and you're not back to the truck. That's a good thing, right? It's like you're howling tonight, just brought that back. How exhilarating it is to hear a wolf after dark when you're still a mile from your truck. It's exhilarating, it's fearful, but it's also joyous, right? Because it's an intimate relationship with nature. And I think Jim Posowich is one of my heroes. He was a great conservationist and fish biologist. Jim put it this way in a reference to wild trout management, but it applies to wildlife in general, is that we fish because we want to be in a relationship with nature. And we fish for wild trout because we want the relationship to be honest. And I think that's essentially that notion. We don't hunt to slaughter. We don't hunt to torture. We hunt to be in a relationship and to be part of that predator and prey cycle that dates back to our earliest history.
Yeah, right with that.
Joe, Glenda, Could we open up to a few questions?
Sneak.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Just so I'm clear and I understand the issue is there are wolf packs that were introduced into Yellowstone Park. And during the winter, summer, I don't know, they come out of the park and they drift into the Paradise Valley. And they can prey on cattle herds there, which has angered, I guess, some of the ranchers there for killing those cattle. And the cattle that get killed sometimes are younger and they get compensated for it, but you get compensated for a one-year-old calf when it would grow up into a 2-year-old and be worth twice or 3 times as much money, and they lose that. Because I have an acquaintance that is a rancher, had a long-time ranch there, hates wolves, shoots them with this neck-down thing that is just cartridge. It's just amazing. I'm not exactly, is that what you're up against? Is this the issue with this migration out, and do they migrate back at some point? How does this work? I'm missing the big picture. Thank you.
Well, quickly, because you're looking at Pat there at the end. No, there's no migration. What happens is because wolves are territorial, they have a territory that they roam in, and the Yellowstone wolves in question have part of their territory that goes outside the park. Most of them almost entirely within, but there's some that nip the boundary of the park. There is some more movement outside the park during the hunting seasons because they're intelligent animals and they know there's going to be gut piles. So they'll move very close to the boundary. They're not even moving out of the Gardner Basin. In fact, they won't even move very far down the Gardner Basin. A dispersing wolf might, but that's a wolf that's broken off from its pack and left and it's moving away. The wolves that your friend with the neck down cartridge you're talking to, those are wolves that live there on their territories. So I'm generalizing a little bit because there was a sheep incident about 10 years ago, but for all intent purposes, Yellowstone wolves are not responsible for any livestock killing. And so that's when we're talking about trying to balance this equation about, who are we killing for and what populations. That was off the table for Yellowstone wolves because most of their movements was in the park. They nipped the boundary, and that's when they were shot. When their natural pack movements just came out of the park a little, there were wolves that dispersed, but there is no migration of wolves. Actually, Paradise Valley is kind of a long way from the park line. You have Gardner Basin, Yankee Jim Canyon, Paradise Valley. If a wolf's out there, he or she is dispersing, not moving from their pack. So it was a bit of a more black and white kind of biological discussion. Sorry, Pat, he was looking at you. Yeah.
No, that's fine. That's helpful because we actually have wolves all across Montana. And the further east you go, the fewer wolves there are. And the population is most dense around Yellowstone Park and up around Glacier Park. So in this region, southwest Montana has about roughly a third of the wolves. Region 2, from the Bitterroot all the way up to the Clark Fork, and then Region 1 around Glacier Park, each have fairly high concentrations of wolves from some perspectives. So the challenge is we have, in our call as commissioners, are to manage wolves across the landscape, right? Not to extirpate them anywhere. Our job is to manage them across the landscape using good science and addressing the concerns of the livestock industry or, stock growers. They have every right to defend their property and their stock. And we have to do that in a way outside the park boundary that's the challenge, right? People that love wolves, people that hate wolves. Using biology as the core decision-making factor rather than the politics. Right now, the pressure of wolf hatred seems to be coming from the legislature. And I don't see that same attitude reflected in Montanans. I mean, I think I got... during the wolf, when the wolf issue was before the commission, I think one morning I got up and I think I had 700 or 1,750 emails before lunchtime, right? And I do try and read them, and a lot of them are forms. But in those emails and in the phone calls that I took, it was very common, maybe not the rule, but very, very common for the person to introduce themselves by saying, "Hi, I'm Joe from, East Jesus, Montana. I'm a Republican, and I don't like what you're doing to wolves." So I didn't hear a sweeping majority of people saying, "We hate wolves, let's get rid of them." There were calls, especially stock growers are saying, "Hey, this makes my life tough because I'm calving in February, they're concentrated down here, I got enough trouble with coyotes, and now the wolves are coming in. It's real. We can do that. We have tools to take care of that." That doesn't mean we need to eradicate them across the entire landscape, like we did back in the 20s.
Pat, when you were talking about the aftermath of the 21-22 debacle, you said that the biologists finally got their voice back. How did that happen, and how can we make sure that it continues to happen?
Well, I called the biologists. There were some decisions and some memos that were sent out to try and restrict conversations between the biologists and the commissioners and other people. But it's a bad decision if all I'm making my judgment on is the director's office, their desires. Our job as commissioners is to listen to the biology and listen to the biologists. And I'll be frank with you, some of the biologists didn't want to talk because they were scared for their job. But when the public spoke up, it made it very difficult to hide biology. And the biologists that I spoke with, they weren't raving anti-wolf people, and they weren't raving pro-wolf people. They were biologists that were saying, "Here's in my district, this is what I'm seeing." And that information was kind of left out of the bad decision, the decision when, the legislature said we're going to kill them all, let's kill them all. That was not a biological decision. And the field people were in anguish over that decision. So people talk to your biologists. They live in your communities. They go to your ball games. They go to your church. Talk to them directly as much as you can.
We're going to take a few more questions, but I want to indulge you, please. When we finish with the questions, we have a couple surprises here. If I could just indulge you for 5 minutes after we end tonight. We have some things that some folks up here will surprise them. So if we could have a few more questions, that would be great.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll have you home by next Wednesday, folks, I swear. Okay, we got one right here.
This question's for former Commissioner Byorth. It sounds like the biologists and the commissioners were an important part of making the decisions around how many wolves would be killed in various areas in the state of Montana, especially around the park's boundary. But the public had an influence in that as well. How often would that decision or that kind of decision be made, and how often might the public have an opportunity to weigh in?
See if I summarize it right, and if I don't, please correct me. How often does the public input and the biological input enter into a discussion? Is that a fair portrayal of it?
Yes.
Okay. The Montana Constitution says every decision should be done in the wide open with public comment. And that's been the tradition at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks for years and years. Every issue, whether it's elk, civet cat as a pet, that came up.
Okay. Great.
Every decision should have a public comment period, and every comment should be heard and weighed along with the biology. I guess that's the simplest answer. over the last couple of years, it's been rough. But I think the public really showed up and made their voices heard, from the governor's office all the way down to the commission and the field. And so please don't rest on your laurels. I feel like we had it pretty well. We have an abundance of wildlife. We're not arguing about scarcity anymore. We're arguing over abundance. Too many elk, not enough elk. Too many wolves, not enough wolves. And we had that, we took it for granted as Montanans, and we didn't weigh in as much. And so when we changed the administration, I think we were caught flat-footed, and people woke up in spades, and I thank you, each and every one of you who sent me those emails and called me late at night, because we need you.
Thank you. As Todd alluded to, we have a quick special announcement to make. So I want to call forward Holly Pipple, who's in the crowd, Dorothy Bradley, and Pat and Doug, who are already up here. But yes, I did call forward Holly. Yes. So if you guys could come forward. Wanted to speak quickly to what Mountain Journal is about. You can see most of this that's up here. Pro-science, pro-truth, pro-courage, pro-wildlife. And we really want to honor tonight people that are willing to be courageous stewards of conservation, no matter what it takes. And I think we've heard from these guys tonight that it can be challenging, and sometimes you have to field calls at all times of day and be just managing all kinds of different layers. So thank you for that. And we have our first annual Mountain Journal Conservation Courage Award. And so I want to present those first to Pat and to Doug. Thank you for your incredible civil service. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take the opportunity to shake your hand. Thank you. And Todd's going to introduce the other two awards.
Okay. We have a civil servant. We have a member of an NGO who stepped up when called. We also have, how can each of us make a difference? Here's an example. This is photography by a woman in the Gallatin Valley named Holly Pipple. She gets up every morning, stays out till sunset, and she's been out documenting wildlife in the Gallatin Valley, particularly elk, but lots of species. She sets up trail cams. She is a dynamo. And so she takes photos like this. You know, imagine living in another part of the country and you look at a photo like this of the Gallatin Valley. Extraordinary stuff. But we don't live in Disneyland. We live in one of the fastest growing rural counties in the US. And things are accelerating. And things go off kilter. We have a new class of homelessness called wildlife. What happens when they're pushed off of their range? And again, what difference can one citizen do to open our eyes? This is what Holly Pipple does day in and day out. So, ladies and gentlemen, Holly Pipple. Stay up here. Stay up here, okay? You know, elders come in all forms, and the elder that we're honoring tonight, Dorothy Bradley, has devoted her life to Montana, a place she loves. She's done it in public office. She was there when the Montana Constitution was rewritten, and that guarantees us the right to a healthful environment. She also served in the legislature. In 1992, she ran against Mark Roscoe, one of our most popular governors, and narrowly lost. Last fall, these rivals came together and called for civility in our state and in the nation, a Republican and a Democrat coming together. Dorothy has worked in Indigenous communities. She's worked on water issues. She's taught at Montana State. She's been all over the place. And now she is still carrying on the mantle of wilderness. You know, you think about the Gallatin Range. If the Gallatin Range were dropped into any other state because of the wildlife diversity that's there, it would be the wildest mountain range in any other state outside of Montana and Wyoming. If it were a national park, it'd be the wildest national park due to its wildlife, wilder than every other national park except for, in the lower 48, Glacier, Yellowstone, and Grand Teton. And so Dorothy is still at it, and she's extraordinary. And we're going to hear a few words from her. Dorothy Bradley.
This is a really beautiful honor, Todd and Mountain Journal. It goes right to the heart. I have had so many opportunities in my life that came forward where I could speak out. And I've always thought that that was a matter to be grateful for and not a matter to be honored for. But this honor from Todd and Mountain Journal is so special. I have come to see this outfit as our North Star, as a kind of luminous nerve center that gives us direction and lights the way, and for that you make us so much more effective. And I thank you both for your work and for this honor. For my friends, please don't mind my cane. It seems that COVID has left me a little lightheaded. I'm kind of getting fond of it, but I'll learn to live with it. When I was 12, my geologist father submitted an article to Science magazine in which he predicted that water would be the first natural resource our planet would run short of, and we would feel the impact by the year 2000. And I remember thinking, well, that's pretty grim. I could still be around, and I am. And for a lifetime, I've been driven to try to respond. I find that the question I'm most frequently asked today is whether I have hope, whether I have hope that our planet can survive. And my answer is, wrong question. It's simply a matter of a job to be done, and I would rather fight than watch, as would you. And I've also always been warned about the possibility of burnout, of thinking we're so essential that we're going to work ourselves into a frenzy and then burn on down into a useless nub. We've always had to learn to pace ourselves. We have to get out and run with the wolves. We have to join up with Mary Oliver and love the wild swan. But I want you to know that every one of us is absolutely essential. If it hadn't been for Cecil Garland and the little-known Garland Country Store in Lincoln, Montana, we wouldn't have the Lincoln Scapegoat Wilderness. If it hadn't been for conservative legislator Harrison Fagg 50 years ago from Billings and his love affair with the Beartooths, we wouldn't have the Montana Hard Rock Reclamation Act. If you can save a patch of prairie for a bison or some wildflowers for some bees, you are essential. Maybe you can write an article for the Mountain Journal and pass forward its inspiration. For myself, I've come to prefer to work in the shadows and alone. Honestly, I'm so blooming sentimental that I choke up on television ads for St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And then again, I think, well, maybe St. Jude, the patron saint of the last resort, is a good one for us to hang our hat on. So Todd reminded me that it's good to get out and join up with friends. Friends. A number of years ago, I was part of a delegation from Montana that went to Washington, D.C. to celebrate the placing of the statue of Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin in the Capitol Rotunda. And I was haunted that she was so alone in her crusade for peace. And when she cast her solitary vote against our entering the war, she was berated by her brother, deserted by her fellow suffragists. They threw eggs at her. She had to hide in a phone booth. I have never had to march alone. And in this period of pretty crushing sadness over the state of our planet, there are so many of us right on the front line, shoulder to shoulder, right here. This is the moment to believe in ourselves. They say when you get to the pearly gates, you will see St. Peter there looking at you, and he's looking for scars. And if he doesn't see any, he'll say, "What? You didn't find anything worth fighting for?" Thank you.
Well, I had some words to say before I heard what Dorothy had to say, and I must say she said it so incredibly beautifully. We at Mountain Journal know that you stand for all of the things that she mentioned, that you believe in this ecosystem, and that building awareness around the issues that are taking place in this ecosystem will affect change on the ground. So thank you for being here. Please consider supporting events like this. Remember that Todd's book is for sale out front. Check us out at mountainjournal.org. There's all kinds of stories there on social media. You can donate directly on mountainjournal.org. We believe in you. We know that your voice matters. We know that your impact matters. Your involvement in the issues that are taking place here truly matters and makes a difference. So thank you so much for being here. We're so grateful. Thank you to our panelists. Yes, thank you for attending. Good night.
Thank you all for coming tonight. This is our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd.